momentum is a very powerful tool as a treatment for things like anxiety and depression. I am a human and sometimes things are more difficult, but you still have to play that ball where it landed, regardless of where it lands. This is where I think a lot of people can really struggle, because it's very easy to become a victim of life. I have come up with this 5-step process that I've been talking about since 2022, and I'm going to share it here today. Okay, everyone, I hope you are all well. Welcome back to one of my solo podcast episodes here at Victory Men's Health. If you are in the United States, as I always say in these, and you would like the best possible experience and outcome with your TRT, please do not hesitate to contact my friends at Victory. They are the best, otherwise I would not be here saying so. Anyway, I have spent the last 8 weeks devoting my weekends and spare time to re-recording every lecture I've done since 2019 in a higher quality, updated, more expanded version to be released on my YouTube channel in the coming months. And this has been an interesting experience to kind of go through and see all these different points and how they've evolved over time. And I wanted to highlight a few points that were brought up in a number of lectures. Maybe they're towards the end, maybe there's something that people may be hearing here for the first time that are a bit left of field of the typical content that I would speak about in a science, TRT, biomedical science related podcast. But I would argue equally important, if not sometimes more important, than the nitty-gritty of the mechanistic theory of how TRT works. And the first topic that I would like to cover in today's episode, in this, I guess, what will be maybe a mini series of sorts, is related to what I refer to my 5-step process for self-development. And I've closed a number of lectures on this point and have had a lot of positive feedback in terms of how this has, I think that a lot of the time we need to hear the same stuff in different formats and different vernacular for it to click in a certain way. And I would hope that this podcast today, someone's going to listen to this and maybe they already understand the overall topic, but they'll hear it in a way and at a time or in a certain setting or something like that that will just make it click and make it stick. And therefore they'll get the outcomes that they're looking to achieve. So the reason why this point is important is that a lot of the time when I'm working with guys starting TRT, or I'm speaking with guys who've started TRT and they're not getting the results they're looking for, it's because their lifestyle stuff is out of alignment. And it's all well and good for me to say, well, stop doing this, start doing this, cut all that stuff out. But typically people already know these things, and it's having trouble actually executing on these key areas. Because if it was just as simple as knowing how to cut out the bad stuff and put in the good stuff, then we wouldn't be having the conversation. We wouldn't be in this scenario. So a lot of the time there can be a struggle with actually going, okay, I understand I'm at A and I need to get to B, but how do I get from A to B? And how do I have the internal drive, discipline, motivation, purpose, all of these things to actually make that happen day to day as a human? And I'm a big fan of all the esoteric stuff around purpose and around discipline and around motivation and all these different things. But I think sometimes they can fall short in the sense that they lack the strategies to actually integrate these concepts and to make them executable. So I have come up with this 5-step process that I've been talking about since 2022. And I'm going to share it here today. I'm not going to make this too long in the teeth because I think that this needs to be short, sharp, and to the point. But I am going to go through and explain how each of these steps work and why they work so well. So step 1 is to reverse engineer becoming the best version of yourself. And you hear all the time about people wanting to be the best versions of themselves. And I think that kind of goes without saying. But this idea of reverse engineering, I think, is very important. And for people who don't know what reverse engineering is, I'm going to give a couple of examples. So my original undergrad degree was in digital marketing, and I used to run those Facebook campaigns back around 2011, 2012 when they started popping up, where we would track what websites you went on, and then you'd get an ad based on the browsing behavior in your browser history. And these campaigns, especially back then, I mean, they're still effective now, but they were extremely effective back then because they were this novel form of advertising that Facebook was encouraging people to use. So they would often have extremely good ROI for cost per click and conversions. Alex Hormozy talks about this a lot. This was like the golden era of Facebook ads. So when I was finishing up university and interning for a expert in the field, he taught me this concept of reverse engineering, which is that if you wanted to build a campaign to get amazing, fantastic results, it's difficult to start from square one if you've never done it before. It's much easier to take an example or a template of a campaign that has already worked phenomenally well and then work backwards in terms of breaking it down to see what step one would be. If you work from the finished product back, you can then get an understanding of how the thing works and then how to work backwards in order to achieve that outcome. Another example would be if I told you, hey, build me a car or build a car engine, and I gave you all the parts. That's going to be a difficult thing to do. But if you had a finished car and a finished car engine and you dismantled it and understood how everything went together in that process, that would be a much more insightful and useful process than simply just starting with all the parts and not knowing where to put them. So this is what reverse engineering is. It's starting from the finish and working backwards. So I'm actually going to be referencing my slides here. This is one of the few times I would reference my slides. The way that I know people should do this, because I've seen it work for myself and others, is, and this is where, again, don't let me lose you here when I use the M word, but this is where manifesting actually has some logical, pragmatic, and strategic applications. Now, you can't just sit and manifest this idea in your mind's eye and just expect it to come true. That's a load of nonsense. But what you can do is visualize in your mind's eye very clearly who this best version of you is. And when I say to visualize that clearly, this is an exercise that people can do, is you don't just visualize where this person is in life. You visualize every aspect of this version of you that you would see as your final form or your best possible way that you as an individual could show up in the world. All the traits, all the attributes, all the outcomes that you would admire in a version of yourself and say, this is the pinnacle of who I could be. And you visualize every aspect of this. So what time does this person get up? What's their morning routine? What do they do at the end of the day to wind down? How do they dress? How do they interact with people? How do they drive? What kind of car do they drive? What kind of nutrition plan would they follow? What kind of fitness regime would they follow? What kind of vices would they have eliminated? How would they order off the menu at a restaurant? All of these different small parts and sums that make the whole, you really want to fine tune and visualize and say, well, what are all the habits that this person would have? What are all the small things that this person is also doing that's created this end outcome? And this is a very powerful exercise because you can now work backwards and say, okay, I may not be able to wake up tomorrow and be the, 10% body fat, super strong, super successful, stoic version of myself, but maybe I can start to adopt one or two of his habits. And what would be the easiest, lowest barrier to entry habits that I could start tomorrow? And then what you can start to do is progressively overload these things, just like you would in the gym. So let's say you're going, okay, well, an easy place to start is a set bedtime and a set wake-up time. It's much easier to set a bedtime than it is to set a wake-up time. So set bedtime, set wake-up time. Okay, cool. I'm going to do that for a week. Great. One step in that direction. Maybe the next step is, okay, I'm going to be meticulous with what I have for a morning breakfast. That's easier than controlling all your nutrition throughout the day. Or I'm going to start building a morning routine that is something that I think would allow me to reach this version of myself. And start to build these habits one by one on top of each other gradually over time. And I think that is a very good place to start because It allows you to celebrate the journey of how far you've come rather than how far you have to go, which is another point I'm going to bring up shortly. So I think that is a very good place for people to start because it allows you to celebrate small wins and it allows you to start to build momentum. And momentum is a very powerful tool as a treatment for things like anxiety and depression because you may not have solved the problem, but you feel like you're on your way to solving the problem and you have this sense of pride that you are doing something about it. And I think this is very important because you can take action even with small things.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
So the next step that I think is very important is understanding and accepting that you have to play the ball where it lands in life. And I've brought this up a number of times, and it's very important because it's true. That's just the way that it is. A lot of the time it's not fair. A lot of the time it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So if you're playing a game of baseball and you're fielding in, left outfield and the ball lands in a fresh, steaming, massive pile of dog shit, that sucks. But you've still got to pick the ball up and play it. It also sucks for the guy who catches it. But you have to play that ball where it lands, even if it landed in that steaming pile of dog shit, because that's the game, that's the role. And this is where I think a lot of people can really struggle, because it's very easy to become a victim of life, and it is very easy to give yourself an allowance for not showing up in a way that is exemplary, that is optimal, because life dealt you that shitty hand. And there does need to be a degree of compassion for self. There does need to be a degree of, okay, I am a human and sometimes things are more difficult. But you still have to play that ball where it landed, regardless of where it lands. And over the course of life, it's probably going to land in a bigger pile of shit than it has in the past. That's just the balance of probability. That is just the way life's going to go. So if we get defeated by past circumstances, rather than using past circumstances as a way to build fortitude, to build resilience, to build a springboard to allow to move into the next phase of life, I think that this is a way to basically set yourself up for failure. Because life is always going to throw you a harder curveball down the line. So if you can't handle the past one, you can't handle the next one. And I can honestly say, as someone who's worked with thousands of men for many, many years, I have seen objectively easier and smaller problems bring men to their knees, and I have seen much more difficult, borderline insurmountable circumstances as things that people have overcome. So the things that people are challenged by and the things that people fail at are not objective. Some people can overcome much more difficult circumstances based on things like discipline, based on things like purpose, based on things like being strategic, but most importantly, not allowing themselves to succumb to a victim mindset. So that is a very important step too. Now, when we're talking about the context of TRT as a step 3 here, because I really like the idea that TRT can be a catalyst. It can be this interventional event that happens in a man's life that creates the foundation for him to overcome the circumstances in step 1 and step 2. It can create the drive, it can create the biological foundation for someone to be able to face these scenarios and circumstances and succeed rather than fail. It doesn't do that for you, it doesn't rig the game in your favor, but it gives you the toolbox that at least you have a fair shot. And when you apply the work, when you apply the effort, when you apply the energy, when you apply the strategy, then you're actually able to get the results you deserve. Now, the important part is that you don't get any more than the results that you deserve, but you also don't get anything less. So this point is basically saying to take radical, positive action to make your TRT work for you. I think a lot of people expect TRT to work on you. It works for you. You have to work with the testosterone to get the outcomes that you're wanting to achieve holistically in your life. So yes, when you inject testosterone, you will increase your serum testosterone levels, and there will be other blood work outcomes that are positive from that. But you're not just looking to improve your blood panel, you're looking to improve your life. You're looking to improve your subjective experience of being a human, and in this case specifically being a male. So these things will not just happen by default. You will not just wake up one day and go, I feel like an absolute savage. I'm going to go take on the world. Everything in my way is going to crumble beneath my willpower. That doesn't happen. It might happen for a brief honeymoon period. It's not going to happen. What is going to happen is that you will now have the corrected foundation that allows you to build the life and the person that you ultimately deserve to be, based on your inputs and your outputs. So one thing I've said a lot is that it's not that TRT just takes time to work, it's that it takes time for you to do the work, and it also takes time for testosterone to have the long-term chronic effects of elevated androgen levels on what's called DNA transcription. And to put this very simply, testosterone has chronic effects over time, which are multiplied and facilitated by living in a healthy, congruent way in which these levels would naturally be produced if they could be. Meaning that you have to meet the medicine halfway, and what I would encourage here is not just bringing it up to a 5 out of 10, is taking radical positive action. If you are behind the 8 ball, maintenance effort will not give transformational results. So if you are hoping to achieve, or even expecting with entitlement to achieve transformational results, you will not get this by doing maintenance work. So if you want to have an amazing before and after, not just photo, but before and after outcome, you have to put in an amazing amount of work, because you will only get the results that you deserve. Nothing more, nothing less. This is not the Steve Rogers Super Soldier Serum. This is restoring the optimal testosterone levels that you always should have had. So you will get the results that you deserve. But if you're behind the 8 ball and you're 40 years old, you've got some time to make up for. So this is a long-winded way of saying, apply yourself with more intensity and effort than is the bare minimum standard. Go above and beyond. Now, the next point, step 4, as I said before, and this is a bit of a doubling down on this point, is you need to measure your progress in how far you've come, not how far you are away from your goal. One of the challenging things about being a human is that when you reach your goal, you're going to set another goal. It's never going to be enough. And this is not something that's a bad thing. I'd say this is a feature, not a bug, because it drives you forward. But one thing that you should be doing in measuring your progress, if you are off track, and the further you are off track, the harder it is to get on track, because there's further to get back on, and I would say the slope gets steeper the further you fall off the wagon. So it is very important, if you are climbing and you are clawing your way back up to being on track in your life, you don't belittle yourself and get yourself down that you are not where you should be, because this takes time and work. What you should be focusing on is how far you've come from where you've started and the fact that you are still moving forward. 1% better every day is something that should be celebrated, rather than saying, well, I still have 80% left to go. Yes, but you've made 19% of the progress already. This is something that we have to mentally frame as something to be proud of and to celebrate, because that creates positive reinforcement. Otherwise, it can all be very overwhelming. It can be belittling. It can be something to be ashamed of and saying, I'm not where I should be. Yes, but you're on your way there. And the fact that you've even made progress consistently and gotten yourself out of that hole that many people never get themselves out of is something to celebrate. And that positive reinforcement is like giving yourself a pat on the back. It's like giving yourself encouragement that is going to be the fuel that drives you when the alarm goes off tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. and it's cold and you don't want to get up. You're going to say, I've got momentum. I'm moving forward. I am overcoming the circumstances that other people couldn't. And this is something that you should be proud of. The last point, and this circles back to the sentence that I just said, and this is the part that I think brings it all together, is step 5 is to give yourself a reason to be proud of yourself. And these days, they give participation medals for everything. But your ego, which is the voice inside your head, the voice that is hearing this speech and listening to this and reflecting on this, that guy doesn't give participation medals. Absolutely not. We don't give ourselves participation medals for anything. We are with ourselves 24/7. We know when we don't keep our word. We know when we're putting on a facade. We know all of these things. But we also know when we have made positive changes, when we are working against what we want to do and doing what we need to do. And that is something to be proud of. It's something to be proud of just to be making progress with this journey. Now, it's something to be extremely proud of when you reach the end destination. But it's also important to be proud of the fact that you are breaking that default pattern that is maladaptive, that is not serving you. So giving yourself a reason to be proud of yourself is one of the best treatments for insomnia. When you are laying awake at the end of the day, knowing that you didn't keep your word on your diet, you didn't keep your word on your training, maybe you did a bunch of stuff that you weren't proud of, or you didn't finish your to-do list, that negativity tortures you when you lay your head down at the end of the day and put your head on the pillow. That is not a broken brain. That is not clinical anxiety and depression. That is accountability. That is a feature, not a bug. And if you go to bed at the end of the day proud of the fact that you showed up, you applied effort, you were working on changing your circumstances and changing your actions so they are more in alignment with the person that you want to be and less in alignment with the person that you don't want to be, that is something that brings a sense of peace. And if you are proud of yourself, you are more likely to be confident. And the more confident you are, the less anxious and depressed you will be because you feel like you have capacity. And feeling like you have capacity and you have competence, especially competence in just being you, this is something that is very empowering to allow you to have momentum to move forward. And ultimately, this is all about moving forward. TRT is a multiplier. It is an accelerator. It is something that facilitates resolving these issues, but it is not the sole thing that will solve all your problems. It is working with the medicine to allow yourself to become the ultimate version of you. And these are the steps that I think make the most impact, that I have seen make the most impact in people's lives when they frame things from this perspective. So I hope that helped, and I'll see you all on the next one.
What is testosterone optimization therapy? This is optimizing testosterone levels rather than simply just replacing them. The provider will need to intrinsically understand how testosterone works and how the human body works. So when you follow this process of optimizing testosterone gradually, it allows the patient to acclimatize